Great. Okay. Welcome, everyone. A warm welcome once again to our next seminar. And this is our series on the digital future for business and society, perspectives on AI challenges and opportunities. So, good morning to everyone joining from the US. Good afternoon to our friends from Europe and Great Britain. Good evening to all of you joining from India and South Asia. And I did see a few registrations from Malaysia and Indonesia as well. And a late good evening to visitors joining from New Zealand and Australia. So today's seminar, as well as the entire seminar series, is hosted jointly by Professor Yogesh Dwivedi, who is Professor of Digital Marketing and Innovation and the founding director of the Emerging Markets Research Center and co-director of research at the School of Management, Swansea University, UK. Our second co-host is Professor Ramakrishnan Raman, director of Symbiosis Institute of Business Management, Pune, and Dean Faculty of Management at Symbiosis International University. This entire seminar series is supported by the Center for Technology, Innovation Management and Enterprise, the University of Kent, Digital Marketing and Analytics Special Industry Group, Academy of Marketing, Grenoble IE Graduate School of Management, which is a Grenoble INP school of the University of Grenoble Alps, the Swansea Innovation Lab at Swansea University, the E-Business and E-Government Special Industry Group, British Academy of Management, and the UK Academy for Information Systems. This seminar series is inspired by various perspectives on artificial intelligence, AI for short, and I'll keep using this term AI rather than the long form just to save on a few seconds of time. So it's various perspectives on AI and its transformative potential, which were presented in a recent perspective article by Dwivedi et al. 2019. AI undoubtedly offers a huge transformative potential for the augmentation and even potential replacement of human tasks and activities within a wide range of industrial, intellectual, and social applications. The pace of change is absolutely staggering with new breakthroughs in algorithmic machine learning and autonomous decision making, creating new opportunities for continued innovation. The impact of AI could be significant with industries and sectors ranging from agriculture, finance, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, supply chain, logistics, utilities, all potentially disrupted by AI technologies. This seminar series on the digital future for business and society, perspectives on AI challenges and opportunities, presents various perspectives from a number of leading expert speakers to highlight both the opportunities and challenges posed by the rapid emergence of AI. Allow me now to introduce our eminent speaker for today. He is Mr. Santosh Mishra, CEO, Tamil Nadu E-Governance Agency and Commissioner of E-Governance, Government of Tamil Nadu, India. And he will speak on public policy challenges of AI. Let me now share a brief introduction of Mr. Mishra. Mr. Santosh K. Mishra is a senior officer of the Indian Administrative Service and is at present Commissioner of E-Governance and the CEO of the E-Governance Agency of the Government of Tamil Nadu, India. He leads all the technology initiatives of the Government of Tamil Nadu. He is a public policy and regulatory specialist working in the area of emerging technology. He has a deep technological background with over 21 years of work experience, and he is recognized as a public policy and technology expert. unique combination. He has been leading programs requiring interdisciplinary coordination and has been driving strategic change within the government using technology. He has a MS in electrical engineering from the University of Minnesota, USA, and a Bachelor of Technology from IIT Kanpur, India, with specialization in digital signal processing and communication technology. He is at present pursuing a PhD, and his research topic is public policy challenges of artificial intelligence. Mr. Mishra, the floor is all yours. Over to you.
Thank you, Sandeep ji, for the generous introduction. Thank you, Yogesh ji, for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be here and share some thoughts on how AI is perceived in the government and what are the potential use cases, what are the challenges, and how governments are attempting to take this technology for greater public good. So with that, let me just quickly share what I have. Just give me a sec.
Sure.
Okay. There you are.
Would you like to put it on slideshow?
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
So let me just move this around a bit so that I have visibility. Okay. So good evening and good afternoon or good night for all the people who are joining from different parts of the world. So this session, I'm going to talk about use of AI, its perception of AI in government, and the challenges we face in terms of rolling out AI solutions in the public domain. It will be more practical and field kind of a situation for this session will be more from sharing experiences from the field, from hands-on, if you will. So let me first, before I begin, let me just quickly begin with giving a background on what we do. And this is an outline for this presentation before that. So there's a little bit of context setting, and from policy makers' perspective, what are the challenges of AI? We have Tamil Nadu is one of the only states in the country to have an ethical and safe AI policy. So maybe we will touch upon that as well, and what were the concerns and tensions which were playing in our mind when we were drafting and creating that policy. So India has, as Mr. Sandeep was mentioning, there is a huge benefit which can accrue from AI to the society. And some of the key areas to look at will be, if you look at health, so you have 0.8 doctors per 1,000 teachers, 2.4. Productivity in agriculture is on the lower side of the spectrum. What are the enablers? Enablers are mobile phones, a very high number of internet users. Almost 1/3 of the mobile phones are smartphones. Speed is about 6 Mbps average, which is quite good. So these are some of the positive signals indicating where AI can actually help. Whereas if you look at the health, education, and agriculture, for example, we've just picked 3 sectors, you can see that there's a huge scope. There is no way we will have the government machinery or even the private sector put together would be able to ramp up the number of doctors or number of teachers or productivity to a desired level. So how do you bridge that gap? And I think AI fills in that gap very, very beautifully. Oh yeah, and the cost of internet, cost of data is of course one of the lowest in the world. So that also helps. Quickly about my organization, which I head, it's called Tamil Nadu E-Governance Agency. So we are responsible for all government to citizen services in terms of technology, government to government services. We also act as a tech evaluator for the government. And one of our mandates is also to bridge the digital divide. So basically, if you would like to think of us as Uber of government services, so we pick up all government services from all departments and provide them onto our platform, which is called, we have named it eSevai. So all about 200 odd services are delivered digitally on that platform. Of course, as I said, one of the key aspects is to bridge the digital divide. So we are experimenting with a lot of things to make sure that the digital divide is bridged. In terms of course, we have about 10,000 kiosks across the state where people can actually physically reach and submit their application through those kiosks, or they can of course choose to apply online, whichever works for them. This is last year we did about 1.5. Last year was a bad year, so we did about this statistics is slightly older. Last year we served about 10 million citizens and offered services to them. So to give you a bit of a perspective on why we are exploring AI and what are the things we can do or we want to do with AI, and what are the advantages which we want to derive out of AI, this diagram will help. So we are actually, being a part of the government, we have access to all the government data, which is residing in all government departments, which are about 40 of them. Not necessarily they are data, because they all have come about organically. So some of the data may be 10 years old, the database may be 10-year-old, some databases may be pretty recent, last year's database, some may be on different technology stacks. So not necessarily they are uniform. They are in different silos, they are in different technology stacks, they are in different formats, they are even of different granularity. So just to bring it to your attention that what are the ground realities. So you have this huge amount of data with the limitations I just described. And what we are attempting to build is an integration and exchange platform on top of that, run analytics, create a solid database decision support system to result in data-driven governance. This is the big grand vision. And that is why with this background, you will be able to understand better when I speak about AI, when I talk about challenges of AI, I think this will make sense much more. Okay, so digital divide is what I referred to earlier also. It's very interesting and kind of, circular statement. A digital divide can also be, AI can be a very good tool to bridge the digital divide. See, we have all these services on online platforms. So we have all these 200 or 240, whatever services. Every day we keep adding new services. So people can go and, apply for their various government certificates like community, nativity, income, assistance, social security, pensions, destitute family pensions, old age pensions, farmer social security stuff, labor welfare board stuff. So all these unorganized sector welfare board stuff, benefits. So all that, they have two ways. Either they physically go to a kiosk, eSevai kiosk and get it, or they can apply online. Applying online obviously limits people who are not really well versed with online facilities, people who are old, people who are not really that tech savvy, people who don't have smartphones will not be able to access these services online. So how do you actually remove that barrier? And that's where we have started. We have just put a NLP chatbot last year. So people have started talking to it, conversing in Tamil, and this is a Tamil native chatbot. So it's not really, I mean, if you look at chatbots today, it's a very simple thing and it's very easy to create. What we wanted was a fully functional, built from grounds up Tamil chatbot. And this was a non-trivial problem. We worked with Anna University for almost a year. And now it has come to a shape where it converses very, very intelligently. It understands and it's able to respond to people's queries. So if you want to come to our website and ask for what are the documents needed for getting a ration card, for example. So it will be able to search through the entire government web. I mean, that information is pre-existing. So that information it will be able to share with the user. So now that was the version 1. Now the version 2 is what we want to do is this chatbot to actually cull out all necessary details after interacting with an individual and make an application on behalf of that individual. So that is also true. So now it can actually, based on voice interaction, it can fill up a form to receive a service, which I think is a very significant achievement we have had. And now it is also integrated with the payment gateway. So you can actually use the voice, this NLP chatbot to actually make payment through the payment gateway. And you don't really have to have, you don't have to really worry about whether you are digitally literate or if you are not so well versed with technology. And in fact, it still requires keyboard or at least some degree of typing, even though we have integrated with a Google Voice or interface, but it's not very good. So what we are now working with IIT Madras, in fact, that we will actually integrate with our own Tamil native voice engine as well. So then, right now it is, of course, it is only text based and it can actually extract information, cull out information and fill a form for you. Going forward, maybe another month or two later, you will be actually able to talk to it and have the form filled just by conversing with it. So that's what is on. I think some stuff was the challenges in government in adoption of AI, and I think we've tackled some bit of it. Of course, there's a capacity limitation in government. We need to really build mechanisms to increase capacity in government systems to absorb, understand, and deploy technologies such as AI. Opportunities, as I had talked about, there's a lot of data, a lot of open knowledge. You have huge startup and entrepreneurship spirit, particularly in India. And of course, one of the mechanisms we have used in our organization to harness all this together is to set up a center of excellence in emerging technologies. We call it SEET. It works basically on these 4 or 5 areas. So blockchain, Internet of Things, NLP, satellite and drones, and data analytics. And the idea is to create these low-cost, scalable indigenous solutions for the government. I'll talk about 2 of them and then I'll jump into. So this was kind of an introduction or why we are interested in AI. And I'll talk about, we have an ecosystem and, we talk to a lot of universities, etc. This is our, today we want to focus more on public policy issues. So I'm just kind of skipping things a little fast. So let me just tell you about AI use cases we are looking at. So first one is computer vision based attendance system. We rolled it out in a school. Now the government offices have adopted it. Of course, my office already runs on it. It's a, as I said, low cost, built in-house system. It's an edge computing device, and I may have a picture also. I'll show it to you. It's a low-cost device, edge computing. You just put it anywhere and it does its job. Second is identification of pest and disease in the crops. I talked about three things: health, education, and agriculture. So education, health, agriculture is basically enabling farmers in identifying pests and diseases in their crop and finding a remedy to that by just clicking a picture. It sends it to an AI engine at the back end. This is not edge computing, so this requires use of smartphone and an internet connection. And of course, health-wise, we have just we started this one. The third one, detecting internal bleeding from brain scan, was one of the earlier projects, which kind of worked halfway and then it got abandoned because the department lost. We didn't get enough support from the department, and the gentleman who was helping us got shifted and priorities changed. But something very exciting is happening on the health also. We have just developed again in-house a smart app which can detect cataract. So the problem, the health department reached out to us saying that I have a problem. I don't have enough trained field staff who can go and screen every possible vulnerable individual, people who are prone to cataract, which is primarily elderly population, rural area population, and low income settlements in the urban areas. So can you help us? So we designed this app so anybody can take that app and download it and click a picture and it tells you whether there is a cataract in the eye or not. We did a field trial in 4 districts. It has given very encouraging results. Accuracy is around 80%. But given the fact that it has been trained only about 5,000 images so far, it's 80% is very good. I think after these field trials, there is another round of training going to happen. So the moment we touch about 90 to 95%, I think it will be a fantastic boost in terms of preventing blindness from occurring. At least the blindness which is attributable to cataract. So that work is going on. We have some other, this chatbot I talked about. So there's a very nice Tamil chatbot, which we have developed with help of Anna University, and it works for our eSevas center. I'll just skip this part. I'll come to this a little later. Maybe this is a quick sort of a broad brush on India landscape on AI. NITI has an AI strategy. Telangana has some AI application on pension. We have this face recognition system, pest identification. We have NLP. We have also worked on the automatic number place recognition system for government of Tamil Nadu. So that's likely to be going on trial for some time. Fake news detection, water conservation. These are some of the stuff which is happening around the country. I'll have a quick video on face recognition system, which we have. Kindly let me know if audio is there or not. Video audio. Is the video audio available?
Yes, Mr. Mishra, it's available.
The Tamil Nadu E-Governance Agency.
Oops, sorry. Oh, my bad.
The Tamil Nadu E-Governance Agency has developed an artificial intelligence-based face recognition system that uses face recognition for registering attendance. This attendance system is another milestone in the list of successful e-governance projects implemented by TNEGA. It helps in precisely tracking the students as they enter the premises and record the information in a database, thus saving time. The highlight of the system is its superior performance in identifying faces, even in low light conditions. This facility was initially implemented in 2 government schools in Chennai. It had a positive impact in improving the attendance of the students in that the attendance.
I'll skip this. This is basically so we tried it on a couple of government schools because they said that it takes about 45 minutes to take attendance every day. So if you can save that time, you can actually have one more session or give more time for the students to actually ask questions or interact with the teachers. So this was one. Of course, it is used in offices now. So that's the several government offices are using it. This is the pest identification system I was talking about. Let me just...
Agency is committed to develop solutions for the issues faced by the farming community by deploying emerging technologies. TNEGA has developed a pest identification system to help the farmers in identifying the pests affecting their crops and the preventive measures to be taken. This system was developed in-house and integrated into the Uravan app already used by the farming community. A farmer with a low-cost mobile phone with an inbuilt camera can now upload pictures of the affected crop. Once the image is uploaded, an intelligence system analyzes and identifies the type of the pest and responds by sending a text message in Tamil explaining what needs to be done to prevent further crop damage. This gives timely guidance to the farmers and helps save their crops.
So that was it. And so we also brought out AI policy. And I want to spend a little time on the public policy challenges of AI, which we wanted to discuss. So I think I need not repeat because I'm sure this would have been covered. There's a huge impact in terms of economy. One of the things they say that AI, creative jobs are kind of safe with AI, but I'm not really sure on that. I mean, GPT-2 this presentation is when GPT-2 has come out. GPT-3 is there now. Now, this is GPT stands for generative pre-training. And this is basically a Google's huge powerhouse in NLP, natural language processing, in terms of text understanding and text processing. And this is mind-boggling what GPT-3 can do. If you search on the net about AI being scary, I mean, it just fills your screens after screens. What AI can, why AI is scary, why is it dangerous, what problems can be there. And a natural question which people may have is, okay, AI is just new technologies. Haven't we seen a lot of new technologies come over the last 50 years? So how is it different? But actually, if it's just a new technology, I mean, why are you so worried about it? The issue is that this is something very, very different. This is something which we don't fully understand. And partly the deep learning network, the fact that you don't really exactly know what has caused that system to make a particular decision puts a big question mark. And explainability in AI is a big, big thing. And when we are talking about public domain rollout, these can be autonomous systems where they take a decision in terms of employment, in terms of credit, in terms of sanctioning loans. Tomorrow it can be in fact, we were having a conversation with the High Court if this can be used in doing some automation of delivering justice. Now, if these systems get rolled out in these kind of areas, law enforcement, we know there was a huge hype about predictive policing, and I think in US they used it. We all know what happened. I don't know if you have been following it up. It started profiling a particular set of people with particular skin tone and a particular build. So when it gets used in these kind of situations, it can actually make a huge impact if it is not carefully rolled out. And AI is something which is very unusual, unlike other technologies. Of course, this is the world of GitHub, where all kinds of, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it's scary at the same time. It's super brilliant as well, and it's really reassuring, because lot of people who have created a solution for a particular situation using some of the most advanced technologies actually put it out for other people to use. I think that's phenomenal. I think it's a GitHub has made this knowledge democratized. At the same time, it also poses a problem, because the code has been written by someone and it's likely to end up in some unintended use case. So somebody might have written a code of classifying objects for a very innocuous use, maybe, identifying plants or flowers, and somebody can use that code to put it in a self-driving autonomous car system. And of course, so if you don't know what is the context from which a software has been picked up, and you use it in a very different context, it can give absolutely devastating results. So this was, I think there was a paper I read by Scherer, and it says these are the problems. It's a discrete system, and it's a diffuse system, and it's a discrete system, two different spellings of discrete, and it's opaque. So if you actually have a system which is opaque, which doesn't let you know how the decision has been made, and you give it the authority to make a decision, what do you do? I mean, how do you ensure that the decision is fair? And that's a challenge. The other challenge is it's rapidly evolving and rapidly changing. When GPT-2 was created, it had 1.75 billion parameters, which is mind-boggling. And OpenAI, which OpenAI actually did not release GPT-2. And it said that it's just too advanced and too prone to misuse by unscrupulous elements that we are not going to release. So in fact, they ended up releasing only 500 million parameter version of it. I think the third release was 750 million. Now GPT-3, which is a natural language processing crazy workhorse, that has 175 billion parameters. Mind you, GPT-2, that is version 2, had 1.5 billion parameters. GPT-3 has 175 billion parameters. So it's like a giant killing machine. I mean, so I mean, some people even question whether it actually is a natural language understanding, or it's just that you have fed it with so much of data that anything in terms of English language, it has already seen it or it knows. So like in the exams, I mean, you either understand the question or you memorize the answer. So, I mean, so GPT-3, some people say that it's like memorizing all the answers, and it's just voluminous. I mean, it's crazy. It's terabytes and exabytes of data which it has been trained. I think the entire web has been crawled and fed into it or something like that. I was reading somewhere. And it's evolving. So the governments have this major issue. As usual, our processes, I mean, how does the policy take shape? So there's something called window of opportunity, where there's a agenda setting, then there's a window of opportunity, then all this has to come together, and as a result, a law or a policy has to be made. Whereas this technology is changing so fast, what is relevant today may not be relevant tomorrow. And unless you have, and this kind of agility in government, nowhere in the world it is possible. So how do you handle this? This is GPT-2 I was talking about. A sample I will tell you about what GPT-2 can do. This was a sentence fed into an AI-based GPT-2 engine, which says, In a shocking finding, scientists discovered a herd of unicorns living in a remote, previously unexplored valley in Andes Mountains. Even more surprising to the researchers was the fact that the unicorns spoke perfect English. This is a fictitious sentence which was fed into the system. And system started filling up the rest of the story. And the system responded. The scientists named the population after their distinctive horn, Ovid's unicorn. These four-horned silver-white unicorns were previously unknown to science. Now, after almost 2 centuries, the mysteries of what sparked this odd phenomena is finally solved. And it created all this. Dr. Jorge Perez, an evolutionary biologist from the University of La Paz, and several companions were exploring the Andes mountain when they found a small valley with no other animals and humans. So this is the output of the system. This was GPT-2, and imagine what GPT-3 would do. So here are the issues which we face, and what makes governments think twice before settling on an AI-based solution. These are the issues. What happens to the privacy? Is this system secure? Is this fair and equitable? I will talk about that if time permits in the next. I have, I think, another 5 minutes, or I'm almost done. I think 40 minutes is what I was given. So I'll cover this and then I'll leave it, maybe give me another 2-3 minutes and I'll close this.
Sure.
You have fairness and equity issues. So for example, if you were to do an autonomous credit decision, who to give loan, who not to give a loan, what will the system see? It will look at all the defaulters and where the defaulters live, probably in some underprivileged area, some low income settlement in the town. So what will it say? That everybody who comes from this particular PIN code is a defaulter. So deny loan to them, which is a very strong correlation between that PIN code and default. But then that's not the root, that's not a causative relationship. So you cannot deny a person loan based on the PIN code. But the systems this AI is essentially a very sophisticated pattern recognition system. It will identify that and it will say, okay, this PIN code means reject. Then of course there are misuse potential. So I mean, you can use it for even the face recognition system. I mean, if I feed it into, almost all cities have this extensive network of CCTV cameras. You feed a particular face, you feed a criminal's face, it's fine. What if you have some other agenda and you feed some other faces and you actually track every individual? I mean, that's what China did, I guess. Lack of standards, lack of regulation. It has issues of societal stability and rights and liberties of individuals. Of course, there is a degree of concern on labor and automation. I'm personally not very worried about it because it always, when one opportunity opens, some other closes. So this is fine. And explainability is a huge, huge issue. So those are like very well-known challenges which you will, if you do an AI issues in public policy or challenges of AI, you will see some variation or some other terminology or similar terminology. Now there are a set of challenges which are not talked about. What is the public trust in AI system? So if I have an AI-based brain hemorrhage detection system, will the patient's family accept its result? What about the doctors? Will they accept the result? Now, do the governments have the capacity to regulate a technology which is evolving so fast? Can we keep up? Can we think of all possible misuses? Can we think of all possible dimensions where AI can actually go rogue? So, of course, there are more challenges in terms of e-apartheid. I mean, there is half the world population does not have digital footprint. AI works on data. So it trains on people who have digital footprints, and it may be made to decide for the people who do not have a digital footprint, which will be a certified disaster. And monopoly. Somebody who had the monopoly to crawl the entire web and train a GPT-3 system. And this was a major episode. I don't know if you have been following it up. There's a lady called Timnit Gebru who was who was working with Google, and she recently was fired. And when she was fired, she said she was fired because she was against these digital monopolies and extensive use of huge data sets in training AI systems, because it has environmental impact. You actually burn up a whole forest for training an AI system. And the third thing is whose data it is. You just saw the Facebook and Australia government spat. The publishers, the news publisher said, you cannot show my data on your website or on your feed and not pay me. And then Facebook finally relented. They are now sharing with the print media. Now the question is, what about you and me? We all use all services. We use services of Swiggy, we services of Zomato, we services of Ola, Uber, Google Map. Will I ever get compensated for my data? Forget about compensation. I'm not even allowed to choose not to share my data. And thankfully, this data protection bill, which is in the parliament and hopefully should get passed, makes it a right to be digitally forgotten. Last 2 minutes and I'll close. Facial recognition system. These are some of the headlines from the newspapers. Facial recognition software as a gender issue. UK launched passport photo checker is known. It knew it would fail with dark skin. I read somewhere that dark skin, it was labeling people completely wrong. And in one case, it actually labeled one of the individuals as chimpanzee or something. That's what I read. How an attempt of correcting bias in technology goes wrong. How do you lose a job if AI doesn't like your face? You can get labeled by AI, your personality type. Predictive policing is a scam. AI is sending people to jail and getting it wrong. AI in law enforcement needs clear oversight. And then, of course, you have these adversarial attacks. So this is AI will correctly classify panda. You add this noise, the picture on the right, which is same to human eye, it looks same as the picture on the left, it will be classified as gibbon. And you have these adversarial attacks. You take this standard stop symbol and you put these 2 white and 2 black stickers. The AI system interpreted it as 45 kilometers speed limit. I mean, imagine autonomous car driving. What will happen with this? Hundreds of people will die. You add this sticker to this banana and it gets classified as a toaster. So last slide, this is what we had come up with in our policy AI safe, ethical and safe AI policy of Tamil Nadu. It is on our website, tnej.gov.in. And I would encourage you to download and read it. It has also a blockchain policy. Please read and let me know your comments if you have any. 7-parameter framework we have prescribed for any AI rollout in Tamil Nadu. It's called very conveniently acronymed as DeepMax, which is diversity, equity, fairness, ethics, privacy and data protection, misuse protection, audit and transparency, and cross-geography and cross-society application. These 7 parameters, unless we are satisfied that any AI solution we are rolling out unless we are satisfied that it meets all 7 criteria, we are not going to let it out in the public domain. With this, I'll stop and I'll open the floor for questions. There was some more stuff I wanted to share, but I think that's okay.
Thank you very much, Santoshji, for a very lucid narrative and also giving us, like you said, a view from the field about how AI in the public sector is getting implemented. And based on your talk, there are a whole bunch of questions on the chat box already. So with the permission of our co-hosts, Professor Dwivedi and Dr. Raman, should we move ahead to the Q&A, sir?
Please. But just wanted to obviously ask Mr. G that, this chatbot that has been implemented, how widely it has been used actually, and if any challenges you have come across from citizen side, user side, in terms of using the chatbot. And similar thing about facial recognition in school, how effective that use is. Thank you.
So facial recognition in school was just a initial experiment. In 2 schools we put it. It was very good. Now we have kind of moved on to offices now. Schools are open to use it, but and this is a lot of times actually people raise worries about this face recognition system, and maybe I'll preempt that question. These are edge computing devices. They don't store anything. They are not connected to the internet. It's a standalone device. It doesn't transmit any data. It does not store any images. It stores features of a face, and that is one-way street. You cannot reconstitute faces from the features, because these are features not as in features we understand it, but features as AI understands it. So that's pretty safe. But government departments, it's been very helpful. In our department, when the corona struck, people were very hesitant in signing and taking the same pen and using the same pen, using the same paper. So it worked beautifully well. And even those who were using thumb biometric ID devices for attendance, they also find it, they also found it very hard. So this system was very helpful. And now, as I said, of course, in our office, it has been in use for last 1 year. Now we are putting it in 2 other government offices, about 12 devices each. So hopefully schools are also welcome to use it. They have to take a call on their own. For the chatbot, it has been a little long journey, because as I said, we built it bottoms up. So it was not a ready-made chatbot which we used, because primarily wanted to use it in Tamil. And getting a Tamil chatbot, the method many of other people I have seen who follow is that they take an English chatbot and then slap a translator on it. It actually has a disastrous consequences. It will not be workable for us. So we actually did a bottoms up building of this chatbot. So it took some time. A lot of issues were there, and this is geared towards offering government services. So we had to train it for some niche words and niche keywords. So we did that. So now it is quite good. In fact, it's amazing. It's very accurate. And the next version, which this weekend we are launching, is when it will start filling the forms for people also. So it will just get all the detail, and then you just talk to it. See, the problem is that one of the very, very difficult issues in government is it's a standardized system. So I have to design a form which suits 80 million people of Tamil Nadu. It doesn't take into account that there's a huge interpersonal variation in the information. So it will ask, it asks questions which actually, so it has sections which are completely irrelevant to some people, and it has sections which are very, very relevant to some people. And to customize those forms is a very, it will require huge amount of process reengineering, and also it is sometimes impossible because you don't know beforehand what form is suited for an individual. So in this case, and then navigating through thousands and thousands of forms, which form, the simple example is income tax. It has been simplified a lot over the years, I must say that. Even then, today, if Mr. Sandeep Bhattacharya has to file his income tax, I don't know if he is confident that he can do it on his own. However, if I have a chatbot which asks me, are you single? Are you married? If you are married, you have children, what's your income? What is the nature of income? Do you get income? So it's not that all this information is not there, but in the form, it's 30 pages long form, depending on, of course, if you have only salary, then there's a simpler form. But suppose you have a salary, you also run a business, some people do all kinds of stuff. So, the wife might be, working, you might be running a business, you're all kinds, you may be whatever. So then it becomes a huge form, and not all sections are applicable to you. To navigate through this jungle of forms is impossible. So one of the major relief which people will get by using this chatbot is to actually, it'll pick out the right form and fill the details on their behalf, which will make life a lot easier. That is what is exciting about it. And in the phase 3, so phase 1 was over, phase 2 is next week, hopefully we will launch it. And when phase 3, when the voice integration happens, then you can actually just tell it and talk to it and tell that this is what you want. You want to add a name in the ration card. So it will say, okay, I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 information. You please just give answers to all these and I'll apply it on your behalf.
Thank you, Santoshji. I think you've answered almost 3 questions at once. You answered Professor Yogesh's question. You also answered Dr. Galina Kondrateva's question about ethical issues. And of course, the large question about simplifying these complex tasks that the ordinary citizen may not have the wherewithal to really understand what's required, which section, if so-and-so, then skip the next 5 questions and go to that section and so on. So it's very interesting to hear you say that the chatbot, a quote unquote, a complex method of IT implementation, is actually being used to simplify the lives of 80 million citizens. And possibly at some later date, if you compute the time saved into the number of people who are filling your forms, it might give you a massive ROI calculation, manas and so on and so forth.
I think you should do that.
Professor Sandeep, before we
go
ahead, Mr. Santosh Mishra, thank you so much for giving your time. This is Dr. Raman. In fact, phenomenal work that you're doing. It should get a little more coverage, I would say, possibly with the kind of work that you have done. A couple of comments with respect to what you have done with respect to reaching farmers. I saw a couple of examples that you are quoting. I do not know how much of it is actually used on ground by farmers with the kind of support that's given. It'll be great if you're able to give some stats over there that will help us understand how much it has penetrated. The second one is not a question, it's a comment about digitally being forgotten. I feel it's only a myth. There might be people who argue that no, it is not a myth. But, digitally forgotten is a tall order claim, especially in the internet when you're going to have several aspects getting stored, transmitted, which servers, where, what, although there are laws, but I think it'll be something very big if you're able to implement digitally forgotten, as the European Union has done it, US has not yet, but India is planning. This is my view, my comment, that it might not be so easy to implement and it to be a reality of getting digitally forgotten stamp telling 100% done. Now, that's only a comment from my end.
Thank you.
Right. So
please go ahead, Santoshji.
Yeah. So the agriculture thing is very interesting. We talk about ocean of data. We talk about, crazy amount of data on internet and everywhere. When we wanted to build this, I didn't even have 100 images of pests of the most commonly grown crop in India, paddy. We went, searched everywhere, including the agriculture universities databases. Nobody has image databases of crops and their pests. And it's, as I said, for the most commonly grown crop of paddy. So again, we had to do grounds up. And in fact, possibly in Tamil Nadu, we will be the largest data owners or largest repository of pest data today. We focused only on 2 crops, paddy and maize. But you have rightly pointed out, there is an issue there. In fact, there's a greater lesson for us to learn. We are very excited. We are technology the organization is technology. We have people, very, very dedicated people who are just fascinated by the idea that their solutions can improve lives of farmers, of people who are in the last, at the last end of civilization. But what happens is that this requires a huge amount of hand-holding And data labeling is a massive, massive work. So we are just, as I was telling you, we are working on this chatbot, and I have data for voice chatbot. I have almost 10,000 hours of speech data, all kinds, but I don't have it labeled. So labeling is an issue. Of course, we have figured out a mechanism, and for the voice chatbot, if I get about 500 hours of data, that should be good enough. We'll be able to do that. But same thing with the agriculture solution, same thing that I need labeled data, and there are new pests every day. So this has gone through a mobile app of farmers. So there's already a mobile app, which about 5 lakh farmers have downloaded. So it is available to them. The number of images coming to us were daily about 400 to 500, but of late it has slowed down, and it has slowed down because we are not able to respond. The problem is, I don't want it to be an autonomous system. I want it to be a human in the loop system. And because if you give a wrong advice, it will be a disaster. So I can't do that. So that's where there's a bottleneck right now, which we are working with the agriculture department. They have promised that they are going to give us a dedicated team of about 4 to 5 agriculture scientists who will work as human in the loop so that the process can smoothly start. So right now it's choking, and for the reason I told you. About the right to be forgotten, I think you are absolutely right. You can never erase your footprints, and that's not the intention also. The intention is what is called data fiduciaries in the data protection bill. So people who hoard data. So like, you go to this Amazon, or you go to this Flipkarts or Zohos or Swiggies or sorry, not Zoho, what is that? Zomato, Swiggies, and Olas and Ubers and Googles and Microsofts. And so if I want to erase my data, or Netflix, so if I want to erase my data, they have to, Facebook, Twitter, they have to erase the data, and they have to certify that they have erased. It's my data.
I think the moment we start using any of these applications, we are almost signing away pretty much all rights. That's in that agreement, which none of us take time to read, and we just click that checkbox at the bottom of that agreement.
And there are websites.
There goes our privacy.
Absolutely. And then there are websites who are, I would call them very, very unprofessional, because they don't allow you to delete your data at all. They say, oh, you want to deactivate, but I won't allow you to delete the data.
Correct.
Absolutely, especially if it's a credit card data where you have punched in your card and CVV, you can't delete. In fact, some of the big examples that you gave, even today, I'll not be able to delete my credit card information once I fed into their system. It doesn't allow me to delete it at all.
It's completely unprofessional. It's completely atrocious, and it's completely. There has to be a very stiff law to deal with them.
Yeah. Business ethics. I think it's finally boils down to business ethics.
Absolutely.
Santosh ji, we are at the top of the hour, but there are still some questions in the chat box. Do you have some few minutes of extra time available?
Yeah, sure, I can do that.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So we have a very interesting comment from Simon Rudkin, as well as a question. So Simon says, we understand about the question of representative samples from Statistics 101. However, I worry sometimes that we forget about many of those lessons when applying machine learning, because we get dazzled by the science side. Whenever you have an unrepresentative sample, you get a biased result. When we open the black box, this will be what we see. So the literature on ethics and ML is encouraging. Some would argue the same was true of the steam engine and its ability to power things better than water centuries ago. It could reinforce inequalities or overcome them, and AI can too. So his question is, how does AI differ from statistics and traditional technologies?
Well, Statistics, I mean, statistics is deterministic. So, you know, we all did these regressions and, curve fitting, if you will. And you basically said that, okay, this is the least square error, and there is a very deterministic relation between dependent variable and independent variable. And that's primarily what statistics did. AI doesn't do that. AI is a very sophisticated pattern recognition system. And you are absolutely dot on when you say that the bias actually creeps in from data. Unfortunate part is, as I said in my presentation, I don't know if I was emphatic enough, there is half the world population does not exist on the digital net. They don't have a digital footprint. And you are able to train only those with those data points. The data points are about people who have a digital footprint. So it knows about my preference of food, or it knows my preference of news channels, or it knows my preference of, whatever, movies. But it doesn't know about the preference of the people who don't ever access these services from their devices. So obviously, I mean, if you have wrong set of, not wrong setup, I should say, if you have an unrepresentative sample, you are landing for disaster. So I think what you have pointed out is right, but this is a big black box. And the problem is, like in statistics, you know what is happening. So if you change a parameter, you can see the shape of the curve changing, and they'll say, oh, it is overfitting or underfitting or whatever, the shape is changing. Here you have no clue as to what's happening. There is, the reward is, because it's a deep network, multi-layered, and every layer is connected to every layer with multiple weights. And you have, at the end of it, there is a reward for right pattern recognition. Now, how that pattern recognition back propagates and how that reward back propagates through those layers, and how does it distribute along the weights, nobody knows. So that's a problem with this technology.
Thank you. We have a question from Dr. Karine Dominguez-Berry, University of Grenoble in France. Dear Dr. Santosh Mishra, thank you very much for your really interesting presentation with all the cases presented. Is social acceptance a topic of debate in India? If yes, what are the most sensitive topics?
Sorry, Mr. Ji, just wanted to say thank you so much. I have to leave. I have to attend another meeting now.
Sure,
but thank you so much for obviously giving your time today, and this really interesting talk. And you can see the engagement through comments. So great to see all these developments. And I would look forward to learn about your new AI system powered by Vice to fill form, to see how it works actually, if it works. And what about errors, and who would be responsible if there any error introduced through these kind of systems? So I look forward to those kind of updates in future. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, for...
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Yogesh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, Dr. Karine, I think social acceptance is a prerequisite for any AI solution to work. If I have an AI solution and there is no social acceptance to it, it's not going to be used. In a democratic system, there is no way you can force people to use a particular system unless they like it. So whether there is a debate around it, whether, I'm sure, all the people who are studying this, the anthropologists or even AI researchers who are looking at, or even behavioral scientists, I'm sure this is a dimension in their mind, but whether that debate happens or not, people are not going to use this technology. They are not going to trust this technology. So as a result, it will be a complete waste if the government tries to implement it. So at least from our government perspective, we know that we will not roll out. Of course, whatever we are doing, we are always keeping a human in the loop. So, and particularly when it relates to health, when it relates to potential irreversible damage, that is where we are very, very cautious, and we are not allowing technology to take over itself. Of course, there might be over a particular period when people generate, enough trust in the system, like cataract detection. So the cataract detection system we have rolled out, even if there is, it just says that, oh, this looks like a mature cataract, or this looks like a case where you should operate upon, or so it's essentially a triaging system. It essentially tells, oh, this is a priority case, this is not a priority case. The problem the government or the system is facing, that it has just too many cases to sift through. So they don't know which 10 cases. If I have 1,000 cases to deal with, I can. But if I have to if I have to scan million people to identify the 1,000 people, that scanning bandwidth or the scanning capacity I do not have. So this system actually does that scanning for them. Okay, so 1,000, these are the top 1,000 cases which you need to look at to avoid, to operate upon for cataract, for example. So human in the loop is extremely important. Social acceptance, without social acceptance, no AI system, at least in India, can be rolled out.
Thank you, Santoshji. So finally, we have a question, and the question is very interesting. It's actually an invitation for you, Santoshji. So this is from Dr. Annie Tobadji of Swansea University, if I'm not mistaken. So Annie says, "Dear Dr. Santosh Mishra, thank you very much for your interesting talk and your clearly modern, enlightened work that you're doing in the best interest of citizens in India. Would you be interested in presenting your best practices from India to the European Commission in September at a DG Regio and European Regional Science Association meeting? EC policymakers will be delighted to hear this amazing progress you've made there in using modern technologies in such an intelligent and thoughtful manner for solving real policy implementation challenges." So this is Annie Tobadji, and Santoshji, you can reply to that if you like.
Yeah, sure. Dr. Tobadji, I'm always, see, this whole thing is a big, giant learning experience for all of us. I mean, at least certainly for me. So I have been, I have interacted with so many people and two of the areas I work on are blockchain and AI, and both I have actually been interacting and talking to people and actually exchanging ideas, and will be more than happy to share whatever I know with anyone who's interested in use of AI, and especially the public authorities and public service agencies who are thinking of using AI in delivering their public services. So it will be a pleasure.
Fantastic. So Annie is writing, I will send you the official invitation, and we are all exclusively happy you will be with us. And if I can do a good deed for the day, I'll try and share an email to both of you, Santoshji as well as Annie, so that you are all connected, and from there on you can correspond directly.
Absolutely. Kindly share my Gmail address. That's faster.
Will do. I shall do that. Fantastic. Santoshji, thank you so much. It was a great insight great number or series of insights that you shared with us, and the scale of the challenge that you're tackling. Simply, if we look at the volume of the data that you have to crunch through for any application on AI, it's humongous. And we eagerly look forward to your voice operated app and chatbot that you mentioned you're launching as soon as next week. Because that has huge potential. So thank you so much for sharing that.
The voice one is coming in about 2 months' time.
Okay, all right.
The form filling one is launching next week. So the chatbot is already there for last 1 year, and we have really made significant changes and improved a lot now. Okay. So it's quite good. filling the forms and actually submitting on behalf of people is what will happen next week. And voice will take another 2 months.
Okay, okay, that's not too far away in the overall scheme of things. And like I said, it has humongous potential. And it would be very interesting to really see the savings achieved, the ROI, the manas, and all of
I
that.
would invite you to kindly do that study. I think that will be really nice.
Sure, maybe we can rope in a couple of researchers from SIBM Pune as well and measure it.
We get
Great.
so busy with implementing all this, we really lose track of some of the record keeping requirements. So
Sure.
it will be great if an academic institution like yours does that.
Sure. We do quite a bit of work in analytics. I do have quite a few colleagues. In fact, my own research area is people analytics. Although it's in slightly different area, I study attrition, but people analytics is of interest, I think, to a lot of researchers. So we'll certainly be in touch. So once again, heartfelt thanks from all of us on behalf of Dr. Raman and Dr. Dwivedi, who had to leave early. Thank you very much, Santosh ji. A warm thanks to all of our dear participants for their attendance and enthusiastic participation, as you saw from the lively question and answers, and even the invite to the event that came through from Annie Tobaji. I would be remiss in my duty if I did not thank Rajesh Baghewadi and his team, who are our IT team, and they have created the entire IT infrastructure for the smooth conduct of all of these seminars. And last but not the least, Santosh ji, we have a very interesting team in SIBM Pune, a student team. They are called as iSmart, and they take care of all of the public relations on behalf of SIBM Pune. So they have been watching you carefully, and they would have clicked a few photographs, electronic photographs, which they will send you a few thank you e-frames in a matter of a few minutes. And at the point where you visit SIBM Pune, they'll actually give you a physical frame within about 30 seconds of you leaving the, in fact, getting down the auditorium steps, they'll come and present the frame to you. But because we are not able to host you in person, we will send it to you via email.
Post the pandemic, for sure, Maharashtra is one state where still COVID is a big headache for us. Right. So once this is all done, we are sure that we're going to invite you here to our campus.
I would love to. In fact, Symbiosis is a place I wanted to visit always. So yeah. It's good that it is happening now. So hopefully in another 3-4 months time, when things become all right, I'll be available.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Santosh ji. And stay safe, stay well. We look forward to hosting you in the not too distant future.